when we took the break, we were talking about the debt ceiling, and you raised a couple of things about the debt ceiling in the essay you wrote for the Peterson Foundation that I don't see very often, and I agree with, and so I'd like to just bring them out. One is we should probably just eliminate the debt ceiling to begin with, and I know that sounds odd from a fiscal responsibility group like the Concord Coalition, but I don't see that it does any good, and it does great potential harm. The other thing you said was, okay, well, if we're not going to eliminate the debt ceiling, maybe they could come up with a more effective trigger of what would happen if you reach a certain point, rather than having the government default on its obligations. Maybe have an across-the-board tax increase so we would pay our bills. And I've always thought that would be a good fallback position. Obviously, politicians haven't rushed to endorse that proposal, but why does that make sense to you?
So here's the thing. I think that the trigger right now is create chaos in the banking system and have many people who are owed payments from the government either not get them or get them late. I don't think anybody really wants that. Not Republicans, not Democrats, not the American people, but I think they don't really understand it, right? It comes back to this idea of like, how much knowledge do people have in terms of understanding what would it mean to not pay our debts, right? So they sort of are thinking, the metaphor that often gets used is, well, if you've maxed out your credit card, the solution is not to raise the credit card limit. So the public thinks of it as like, well, we're raising the limit and they're just going to go out and spend more. But that's not actually what's happening. It's that they've already gone out and spent it and they've got the goods and now they're saying, I'm going to refuse to pay. And that's not a great system. I would get rid of it. I think that there's nothing that's really helpful about it. The people who disagree with that would say, no, it forces a really important conversation about how much we should be spending. I don't agree with that, but that's their argument, that like it forces the conversation. So then my response is, well, if we're going to force the conversation, we need a different trigger. Because what would happen if we breached the debt ceiling? Well, the one thing we know for sure would happen is interest rates would go up. And that would mean government spending, all else equal, goes up because we would spend more money paying interest. So if the goal is to bring government spending down, you do not want to have a trigger that is going to lead to having to spend more on interest payments. So if we want that conversation when we've borrowed a certain amount of money to say, hey, wait, what are we doing? Are we looking, let's take a good look at our spending and our tax system. Again, I would get rid of it. But for people who want that, then I think what's a sensible trigger? And a sensible trigger would be across the board tax increases. And I mean, now I just have everybody hating on me. I mean, what Republicans and Democrats can agree with is they hate that idea. Why do they hate that idea? Because it could happen, right? And they all sort of believe that nobody will sink the boat of the United States, so like the debt ceiling breach will never actually happen. But like playing chicken repeatedly with the US financial system seems really, really dumb. Play chicken with taxes. We have a trigger across the board tax increases. That's the only thing that would actually also truly address our fiscal situation, because they could do across the board spending cuts as well. But as long as they're going to exclude all sorts of entitlement payments or non-discretionary mandatory spending, if they exclude all of that, you couldn't really get it done through cuts in particularly non-defense discretionary spending. So then you got to do it through revenue. So, they need to think about changing the trigger. And I think the fact that they don't want to talk about changing the trigger is really evidence of how dishonest the debate about the debt ceiling truly is. And And, we need some leaders to stand up and, point out that the emperor has no clothes here. This is a terrible, risky debate. And one way to do that would be trying to change the trigger and forcing the discussion to be around that.